Good morning. Hello. I had to vary it a little bit. So I want to thank Chodo and Koshin for including me in this wonderful retreat. I so admire all the work that they've been doing over the years and how remarkably quickly it's spread and developed, and it seems to be flourishing and sending out tentacles in all sorts of different and intriguing directions. So I'd like to thank them for that. It's an honor to be here with all of you. It's an interesting point in a retreat like this. We had that very heartfelt talk last night by Mr. Ostazeski, who touched on many really key points in a contemplative view of interconnectedness and the cycle of living and dying, and how we meet that at every moment with every breath, the immediacy of death and the immediacy of fresh arising of experience moment to moment. And his beautiful slideshow really had such power in showing people at a very difficult transition point in their life, something that we all face, of course, and that's why you're all here, I would guess. I just wanted to start by asking that you view this as a beginning of a journey that we're doing over the course of this weekend, and reflect on where you are right now in your physicality, your emotional realm, your thinking patterns. What are your aspirations? Why are you here? What would you like to accomplish over the course of this very short 3-day period? I think it's good to reflect and have a proper beginning, middle, and ending in everything that we do. And so I'd like to spend just a moment to give you time to think about, here you are. Are you here? Have you actually arrived? Are you fully present? And why are you here? What is your inspiration? And where would you like to go with that? What would you like to learn? What would you like to learn about yourself and learn about this topic of awake at the bedside? So take a moment. Okay, so proceeding along, it occurred to me that when Chodo and Koshin were planning this retreat, they probably didn't anticipate that it would be at such a kind of a charged and edgy time in our society. Maybe they did, but I doubt it. I feel quite edgy myself in the middle of all of the energies arising around the course of our current election, in the home stretch of this horribly long and painful and very revealing and process of going through this presidential election. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, because it's sort of like a background kind of energy that I feel, like, what are we doing? What's wrong with this country? Anyway, so that's a little bit of the background. And then there's another background. I know that the focus here is awake at the bedside. And I think I view my role in this talk as just to raise some questions and introduce some themes that I would guess would be going through the various presentations over the course of the weekend. And I sort of thought at first of awake. What does that mean? Awake at the bedside. What does it mean to be awake? We'll look into that. And then I started thinking of bedside, and I thought, we're always at the bedside. We're always at the bedside. We're at the bedside of our entire life on Earth right now. In the next 40 to 50 years, over 70% of all species will have become extinct. You're talking about a big bedside. So within the particularities of our work, there's a broader environment which is easily overwhelming and definitely on topic for what we're talking about, how we relate to impermanence, how we relate to change, how we relate to death and dying, and how we can contribute and not be totally overwhelmed at every level, on the political, environmental, social, cultural, at every level. We're facing serious issues now. So I always like to put that in context. How to be awake within the suffering world, within all the things that don't work, within all the seemingly intractable problems that we're facing. Being awake is not about having a situation that's easy or that is easily solvable or necessarily clear. Being awake in the midst of confusion, in the midst of struggle, in the midst of overwhelming challenges. And then I thought of radical, wake at the bedside, radical compassion. I thought, radical compassion, isn't that a little bit, over the top? Can't you have regular compassion? Wouldn't that be good enough? Good enough. And I thought, well, radical can mean we're really extra compassionate. I thought, yeah, maybe. And then I thought it also has a sense of what are the roots of compassion. Compassion that is rooted. The compassion that is rooted, that is not dreamy or airy or ungrounded, but rooted compassion, exploring what that might be, radical. What is that? Compassion is such an important word, and it's such an overused word, and such a vague word in many ways. And we're going to be looking into that as one of the topics this morning. So radical and compassion. So as a ground, I wanted to start with just reflecting on some of the common views about compassion and perhaps, confusion about it, perhaps, or different ideas. I think we're operating within a society that has the assumption that compassion is weak. It's something weak and sentimental. It's something that women have. It means therefore it's not that good. It's soft, soft as opposed to hard. Like the hard sciences are much better than soft sciences. You can imagine where that imagery comes from. Just saying. And there's a quality of, I think, equating compassion with kind of sentimentality and kind of hothouse flower quality. It's not usually joined in the common view, I don't think, with courage and with strength. And it's also an invisible quality. Actually, I prefer the word love myself. But I was recently at a program, and Matthew Ricard, the great Buddhist teacher, scholar, was talking about compassion, and he used the phrase, the banality of goodness. It's kind of a flip on Hannah Arendt, the banality of evil. But he made the interesting point, and I've heard it made other places as well, that there's so many acts of simple goodness that weave our whole world together that are not seen. There's so much the water that we assume that it's invisible. And the way our minds work and the way media works, etc., is that we're drawn out to acts of violence and conflict and anger and aggression and accidents and murders and various things like that. Those are more interesting to look at for most of us. That's why I read mystery novels and such. But in fact, none of us would be here, none of us would be alive at all without all sorts of unspoken bonds of love and compassion that are natural to our human society. We were all helpless little babies, and no matter what we think about whoever raised us, we wouldn't be alive without them and many other people in an interconnected web that Frank was referring to. So how can we clarify what is compassion? What are components that make compassion rooted, grounded? And I'd like to make some distinctions, because I think a lot of times compassion is conflated with empathy, and they're not the same. As they say, connected with sentimentality is not the same. Is compassion like an emotion or sort of a fuzzy feeling you're supposed to have? Is it just a sense of being affected by other people? What is compassion? So empathy, there's a lot of studies about empathy, and from the very earliest times, people have a natural sense of empathy. Little children, there's all sorts of studies about the natural tendency to notice the feelings of others and to extend out in some ways. And that's interesting too, because in terms of the context, looking at compassion, until very, very, very recently, compassion was considered not a natural part of things. The view of humans was as selfish, the selfish gene, the selfish person. Everyone's individual, separate, out for their own development. And even when scientists would talk about compassion, it was always interpreted as, well, that's just another tool of selfishness. There was not an acknowledgement of the human goodness or human ability to reach out very naturally and simply. Recently, there's been more work on that, which is really great. But if you think about it, into the psychological field, there's a book about 3 inches thick on abnormalities and neuroses and psychoses, and there's not a corresponding book about the various aspects of awakened mind and various ways of being compassionate, empathic. It's very outweighed. So the beginning point of compassion is really looking into what is our view, of humans. What is our view? It affects everything. What is our view? Do we think people are basically selfish and then they have to work really hard to overcome that or pretend not to be? Are people at some level basically good and worthwhile? Are you basically good? Are you worthwhile to be here as you are without having to prove anything to anyone? Can you start from that basis? So a difference between compassion and empathy is that empathy can mean that we just take in the sorrow and painful feelings around us. We take it in and we don't know what to do with it, and we get overwhelmed. Burnout, in people who work in the healthcare is over than 60% experience burnout. Because the empathy is self-directed. It's focusing on the bad feelings that arise when we're in a difficult situation with others. It's connected with kind of an emotional contagion that can happen. I think we all feel that. If you go into a situation and you start out in your decent mood and you run into someone and they're furious or depressed, and immediately you feel like you ever feel that in your body? You feel your energy just it's contagion, and then what to do with that when that comes in. And the teachings of compassion are based on taking that empathic feeling and turning it outwards towards other. Compassion is based on awareness and attention to other. Another thing about compassion that's so important in terms of a seminar like this, which is called contemplative, is that just in the same way we can cultivate other qualities and learn various skills, compassion is something that can be deliberately fostered and nourished and developed through various contemplative practices. There's been a lot of focus in growth within our society of the mindfulness movement, etc. But I think there's beginning to be the recognition that you can't separate mindfulness, the head, and the heart. The heart Because mindfulness without heart is not really, it's useful, but it's not complete. So there are various ways of cultivating greater compassion. And some people basically do that every single day. And they can see the results. Scientists like to see the results by looking at the brain and something lights up. That's helpful too. The interesting thing is that in studies, what is aroused in the brain through empathy is connected more with painful experiences, and what's aroused in the brain through compassion, rising of compassion, is connected with well-being and even joy. So a lot of times people think of compassion, again, looking at preconceptions perhaps, is that you're supposed to feel bad. Yes, it's sometimes being called suffer with, which is more like empathy. But the great imagery for compassion from the Buddhist tradition is that compassion, being willing to stay with the suffering world, your own suffering inner world and the world around you, is what leads to a great release of well-being and joy. One way of looking at this is there's kind of you distinguish a deliberate arousing of compassion through various practices. I'll talk about more in my workshop. Its idea is that by repeatedly touching into practices, deliberately feeding that side of you, that compassionate side of you, can eventually result in what is more spontaneous compassion. That's not effortful, not coming from you, but as a response to the situation in front of you, effortlessly arising compassion, which is the goal, I suppose you could say. The image I like best about compassion from the various texts is the image of the sun. The sun. The sun shines because that is its nature, as what a sun is, something that shines in the sky. And the sun does not have a project out of it. It's not a project. So, I got to get up and shine again today. I've done this over and over again. It just does it because that's who it is. And the other thing about the sun is that it does not discriminate near and far, preferred people and unpreferred people, flowers and weeds. It doesn't care. Whatever just shines in all directions dispassionately. So it's not sentimental, I don't think, the sun. It just is. It just radiates. That's the quality of compassion. And by cultivating compassion, the idea is that you don't need to do a project. You don't need to think twice. You can just naturally radiate this quality because it is who you are at your deepest level. You just need to release it and have ways of freeing it, I guess, from the constraints of fear and kind of sentimentality and various kind of weird hopes that we have and projects in mind and et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted to talk about 3 components briefly that I think are essential and balance each other in thinking about compassion. And again, I'm just trying to raise questions. I don't really have answers. These 3 components are awareness, kindness, and openness. Awareness, kindness, and openness. The notion of awareness being a component of compassion is that it's not simply, it's a combination of what we perceive and the loving impulse that naturally comes from our heart. It's not just an impulse without any insight, without any knowledge. A lot of, I think the trouble in terms of being at a bedside, begins with skipping the step of awareness. And awareness just means a receptivity. It's like having antennae that pick up on what's needed in a situation. Or it's like having peripheral vision. It's based on kind of inquisitive, observational quality. It's not based on like figuring it out, like I got to figure out what's going on. It's more like a opening to what messages are coming at you that you don't have to cook up, but it can enter into you. So awareness is tuning in, another way of thinking about it, being in tune with what you're doing and being in tune with the other, being in tune with the situation. Without awareness, the problem is that you could not have real compassion, but what my teacher called idiot compassion, which is an important term. You know, it's a lot of times we have this great impulse, I'm going to go help someone, and we go off half-cocked and we go, I'm going to help you, and we just make everything worse because we have no awareness. It's the road to whatever hell is paved with good intentions kind of thing. Without awareness, that's what we do. We have all sorts of ideas and just go run off and do them and make a mess, add to the mess. The second quality is openness. And openness is a sense of letting go of our need to have solid answers and control all the time. It's not assuming we know much, which I think is important to study and learn a lot, but it's also important to drop that and have open ground of possibility. When we don't have openness, we limit what we see. We put blinders. We only see according to our tunnels that we happen to prefer tunnels, and we miss, everything else that's going on. Openness means to drop things, come into presence, and be able to be still or hold ourselves in an uncertain, vulnerable place, even just for a minute, a second, changes everything. Because without that dropping down, without that openness, we aren't really on the same level as the people we are dealing with. There's always a sense of coming from down rather than meeting on equal ground. I'm here to help you. I'm in this helper role, and you're my project, and I'm going to make you better, and then I'll feel great. Yeah. No. And finally, the last aspect is a kindness. So awareness, kindness, openness. Kindness could be called a friendliness as well, or a certain positive sense of well-being. It also reflects the quality of tuning into oneself, knowing one's strengths and weaknesses, not feeling a need to hide or be different than you actually are. I think we all have ideas of what a good caregiver or person should be, and then we try to, squish ourselves into that, like we're putting in a cookie mold, and then we look like the cookie instead of ourselves. But this is a sense of knowing who we are and actually being at ease, not in terms of our perfected version of ourselves, but in our flawed and very human version of ourselves. Also, this sense of kindness or friendliness points to something that's not talked about that much in terms of caregiving, I don't think, which is joy. There can be a joyful quality in really being present for another person. It can be a joyful quality in standing with some roots in the midst of a suffering world. Sometimes I think people feel guilty. They're not supposed to feel good, if they're doing important things, dealing with like end of life and suffering and humans in hospitals, so they should feel bad all the time. It's very serious stuff I'm doing. I'm a serious person. I'm not sitting around watching CSI. But since there's a quality of joy that's not based on things going well or things going bad, or happiness or sadness or the various ups and downs of things. This quality of joy and courage in this work that can really fuel what you do and be a force undermining burnout and that sense of holding pain and not knowing how to release it. So those are three very simple qualities, and I think the ideal is to have some dialogue at this about whatever you would like to talk about as your first statement. I know it's a big crowd, it's kind of intimidating to raise your voice, but I think your voices are important to enter into this, to make the whole experience more rich.
Hello, thank you. I love the distinction that you made between empathy and compassion, and I love the idea that compassion can be nourished and cultivated and strengthened and learned, that we don't have to assume we have it or not, or don't have to, just don't have to assume. And well, I do believe this is true for all of us. I do love the idea that in medical schools, compassion could be taught. And I don't know if it is, and there'd have to be an opening for that, but how wonderful it would be. And I'm actually thinking of Tony Beck, who was here, and he talked very openly about the work he did to bring compassion into every room, and he's a medical oncologist or something. And so I love that. So I thank you for emphasizing that. And it's easy to hear it and say, well, yeah, compassion, kindness, openness, but that it can be taught and strengthened. And I know in myself I want to exercise that muscle, and I thank you for bringing that to us.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting in some ways. I think that for me, one thing that makes a big difference in how you keep with this kind of work is viewing it as a path, and viewing yourself as a student, and not viewing there being an end point where now you've got the tools. You know, like Frank talked about having your toolkit and then stumbling over the toolkit. And I think in navigating between various ways of responding to suffering, one is just to shut down and armor because it's just too much to bear, and the other is being kind of overwhelmed that I think we all experience from time to time. We're just overwhelmed by the energy of someone's sorrow or someone's grief or pain. So how to have a middle ground where you're not falling into those extremes, and how you're learning as kind of veering perhaps back and forth between the two as kind of as a journey of discovery.
I think going along with what you said about it being a journey.
Oh, I didn't see you.
About it being a journey between the two, I think one of the other points I'm wondering if you could address is being able to receive compassion. I think as caretakers, we often, and that can lead to burnout, we often think about, okay, we are giving compassion, and I think one of the things I struggle with and I see other caretakers struggling with is the ability to be on the receiving end of that compassion, breaking down our barriers of pride, to be able to receive it, and thus helping decrease burnout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's another aspect of the friendliness, kindness, is kindness to yourself. And also the whole notion, it's compassion, isn't something that you give or receive exactly. I think that whole notion is like, I have this stuff I'm going to give you. My compassion sets us up for that kind of issue, you know. It is something that is, when true compassion is based on an exchange with the other. It's not that anyone's giving anyone anything, really. It's you're willing to be open and real together. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a good thing to explore about compassion. Where is it? Where does it exist, you know? Yeah.
Judy, thank you so much for giving us the notion of the bedside of the world and you had us looking at the demise of species and cultures and languages. And I hope that we're also at the bedside of the cradle, that there are things being born too, that there are things that we are midwiving, I think, that are helping. That we're not just at the demise of things we treasure, but that we're at the origin because we're helping them grow. I think, toward a world in which all that you said today and Frank said last night are possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that, each of us is contributing, hopefully, something positive within the reality of the kind of planetary struggles that are going on. Yeah. And, whatever the future will be, I don't know. But another aspect there of what we do, a single gesture, the smallest single gesture at one single little bedside plants a positive seed within a difficult world. Yeah, I didn't mean to be a bummer, downer, just saying what's real. I was supposed to go to Australia, and someone said, you better see the reef, because it's not going to be there in 20 years. There is that reality. So that's not to be overwhelmed. But I think no matter what, we're aware of that, and it affects us. That's what I'm saying. There's levels happening here. In your situation is happening within a context. Like this is happening within the context of the election. And the election is happening within the context of all sorts of other things. But I think one more thing in terms of what you brought up, it relates directly to what Matthew Ricard was talking about, the banality of goodness. Because the goodness needs to be brought into the awareness more. It needs to be recognized more. And you need to recognize your own goodness more. Not to mention those of others. So, yeah.
Good morning. Thank you so much. Judy, I was really just so delighted in the beginning of your talk about unpacking compassion and all the things of, this sentimental, and I love that you said you don't often sometimes even know what it is and what is awake and what is the bedside, because those are questions I have all the time. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? I was driving here, from across over at the lake going, what is awake? It's just, these are funny terms we toss around, and exploring them and being open to that, allowing something else to inform the actions and not knowing. So thank you for that. And I guess, it's kind of like my perennial question, or my always question is, I work in healthcare. I work in a very productivity-driven environment. And when I first started, I work in Alzheimer's memory care, very pretty significant young people and middle-aged, and it's when I first started this particular setting, I knew I was suffering greatly, not only from just kind of getting in that very chaotic environment, but also trying to manage my productivity and feeling this incredible tension between I'm looking at a screen and there are people falling all around me and pulling literally on the sleeves. I'm going, is today Thursday? Whatever, over and over and over again. And so when you talked about, and now I've kind of gotten in that groove better, I'm handling the device better, but there's still, I can feel the suffering inside of me, the sadness that I have to look at a screen other than a person for great periods of time, because I'm documenting.
Yeah.
I'm
yeah.
documenting, sometimes 2 screens at once in my hands as I'm helping someone on and off a toilet, because there's only so much time, right? And so initially it was incredibly hard for me to kind of come to terms with that. And my practice really nourished me, and my Sangha, who I had to be really vulnerable to my own experiences, and knowing that any small act was enough. So I don't know if you have anything to speak to that, but it's rough.
Well, that the speed and the pressure is some of the hardest, especially for someone who wants to connect in a genuine way. Speed and pressure to, in my experience, especially with nurses, they have so many, clients or patients, and so many technical things they have to do. They barely have time to think or to connect, and it wears on you. It's not the best system. There's a lot of counter forces to compassionate actions that it's important for us to recognize and explore. That is cultural and organizational, and the way our healthcare works, and how we even view someone with a condition like Alzheimer's or cancer or whatever, or just old age and dying, how it's all even viewed. So all I can say is to recognize that in your body. And I think if you have a good practice, you can cultivate, I call mini practices, to give yourself little breaks in the midst of this hard stuff. I was recently had to go climb fairly big, steep mountain thing, and I hate walking uphill, and I'm not really good at it, especially at a high altitude. So I developed this way to take one step break, one step break. I had little tiny breaks all along, and that made a huge difference. So maybe since you're walking along an uphill path, you could insert little mini breaks, even just to think, start, boom, just like that, and try to catch your breath. But I know that documentation thing's awful. I just know that from. Fortunately, I don't have to document anything. I'm so lucky. I don't even remember what I do, let alone document. But anyway, thank you all, and onward.